Hi, I'm Mort Cooper, your host on Change Your Voice, Change Your Life. Subtitle today, Dracula and Friends. Dracula and Friends. We take Dracula to heart in one form or another as a frightening character. Perhaps he was, perhaps he wasn't. Was he real? I doubt it. But there are certain things that, if he were real, he might be quite concerned about. And those things are how we have come from civilization through the years and realized that it wasn't all civilized back then. A gentleman by the name of Socrates took the hemlock because he bothered the Greek society and interfered with their fashion. So he decided not to continue challenging, questioning, and so forth, and took the hemlock. We esteem Socrates, and we make Socrates' deaths heroic. But he is one of the few that said, "I prefer not to go on." Dracula as a character, "I want to be your friend," is a horror character for most of us. But if we look at Dracula and what he portrays, it's another side of our society. It's the frightening aspect of a gentleman who is portrayed as coming from Transylvania, and he flies at night by the seat of his pants. And he flies because he likes to do that. Most of us can't fly. We can't even function during our days. We have a tremendous number of emotional and psychological problems in our lives. Dracula knew who he was as a fictional character and reveled in that. I want to go back through Dracula to talk about some of the horrors of what went on in previous years in what is called civilization. The interesting thing about Socrates is that he preferred to give it up and move on. That's interesting. Plato was a student of Socrates, and he wrote the Republic. Socrates talked about ethics, but ethics really back then didn't matter, and apparently in our society today doesn't matter. So I want to introduce you to our friend Dracula and some of his friends and talk about what Plato had to say. My name is Dracula, and we go back to that because the accent is very important. He wants to be, "I want to be your friend." Ha, ha, ha. But is that real? In Plato's Republic, a fellow by the name of Thrasymachus, that's a strange name to us today, it was a Greek name, Thrasymachus, when Socrates is talking about ethics, Thrasymachus, halfway or three-quarters of the way through the Republic, asks our friend Socrates, "Does not might make right?" Does not might make right? And Socrates never could answer that question because the answer is very obvious. Might does make right, and that's the way it is. Ethics falls by the wayside. So what we have is the story of might making right, and a gentleman, fictional character, Dracula, is going to tell us about what happens in society. It was in the 16th century, you know, and Dracula will tell us about this, that Galileo said the earth revolves about the sun, and the church put him under house arrest, and he recanted because the church showed him the instruments of torture. And our friend Galileo was a very bright gentleman who saw what could happen if he didn't recant. So for the last 8 years of his life, he was under house arrest, and it is alleged that on his deathbed, he said, "The earth revolves about the sun." It took 350 years before the Pope recanted on the front page of the New York Times in 1992, saying that Galileo was right, that the earth revolves about the sun, not the other way around. But the other concern that we might have is the fact that during the Dark Ages, we call it the Dark Ages, as if in our lifetime it's not Dark Age time. In 1345, the French king asked his 3 leading physicians what the cause of the Black Plague was. And they asked, "My liege, can we retire to discuss it?" And the French king said, "Yes, go ahead." And they returned to tell the French king, the 3 leading physicians, the French king, that the Black Plague was caused by the stars coming together in the galaxy, my liege. That position was upheld and maintained until approximately 1899 thereupon, when 2 physicians at the Louis Pasteur Institute discovered that it was not the stars coming together in the galaxy that caused the Black Plague. It was the fact that the rats were carrying the disease, the rats. So from 1345, when 25 million people in Western Europe died from the Black Plague alone, through 550 years, the leading physicians believed that the Black Plague was incurable. They had no answer to it. It took 2 physicians in the Louis Pasteur Institute 550 years later to figure it out. So civility is nice, but civilization may not be all that we look forward to. So if I play Dracula, I want to be your friend. And of course, Dracula was portrayed as a bloodsucker. There are different forms of bloodsucking in societies, and one of the guys who writes about that is Stacey Adams in talking about his cartoon strip, Dilbert, the games we play in business activity. And there are lots of games we play, but Dracula was forthright, and he wanted to be your friend at the castle. And I portray him as moving from Transylvania to New York City because things got tough in Transylvania, and he wanted to be a family man. And he has friends, and some of his friends probably could be this man. I feel that the situation that we have to Henry Kissinger. Henry has an accent as Count Dracula, but you can call him Drek. Drek is a Greek term for whatever you want to make it. Dracula is an interesting guy because I would see him as trying to be a better person than he was. And perhaps he became such, but nobody portrays him as that. And he probably moved on to New York City where he could mingle with people and have a job at night in a prestigious medical center as a hematologist. He was a bright gentleman. And I want to be your friend. He could get blood free. He didn't have to worry about taking a little bite at the castle. But times were tough in Transylvania years ago, and he moved on to New York City. You might recognize him in the guise of different people and say to yourself, that's what they do. That's the way things are. We are of the view that The best things in life are free. Maybe they are, and maybe they aren't. But Dracula, I want to be your friend. What if he had 007, James Bond, as one of his friends? Bond, 007, James Bond. And that's his friend. And then we had Henry Kissinger in the group. Irma Bombeck said of Henry Kissinger, if you missed the first few words of Henry Kissinger, folks, it's all over. That is funny. That is pure hilarity. Henry is the only one that's ever been able to put me under. I've had colleagues who tried to hypnotize me. It didn't work. But 5 minutes listening to Henry Kissinger waiting for dinner at my place put me under. Henry has that voice. Mimi Van Doren said that Henry Kissinger's batteries are not worn down. I was on the Merv show, and we talked about Henry Kissinger. And I didn't know that Mimi Van Doren dated Henry, and she said his batteries are not worn down. I feel it's a situation that they have. If his batteries are not worn down, why does he talk that way? And he also has an accent. Why does he have an accent when his brother doesn't have an accent? They both came over from Europe at the same time. I guess it's one of those strange things. Maybe he likes that accent. I guess he does, because there are people I know who don't have accents but use accents. They're in the medical profession, they're in academia, and they talk with accents. I guess it makes them feel better, but they don't have accents to talk about. So if we talk about Dracula and his accent, I want to be your friend, perhaps in our day he'd probably go to an accent school and try to talk differently, and not, of course, have the cape, and be himself, true to himself. Isn't it interesting that if we ask ourselves, are we true to ourselves? How many people can say yes? Very few. Why? Because they want to be part of the organization, they want to be part of the in-group, they want to be in fashion. And Dracula, if he talked like that, he'd be outstanding, and people would say, what's wrong with that guy? But if he had friends like Bond, James Bond, and Bond were to say, Drek is my friend, that would carry weight. And we always need people who help us to carry weight. So join with me on Change Your Voice, Change Your Life, Dracula and Friends. We like accents. Do we like Drac with his accent? Do we like Bond with his accent? Was Roger Moore born to that voice? No. He developed that. Bond, 007, James Bond. And he developed that sound. We develop voices. Drac didn't have any training back then. Perhaps if he had training, he would have been much more presentable, more likable, more reasonable. But we made him out to be a horror figure. I want to be your friend. Ha, ha, ha. And so it's a stereotype of that voice. I work out at a Y, and I hear people, I wonder why you say that, what you say, but what do you mean by what you say? They talk like that. The voice is very, very dull. It is like Henry, and Henry, I would presume, hears himself and knows what he sounds like. Well, God to give us the gift to hear ourselves as others hear us. I'm of the view that Henry knows what he sounds like. What the situation is happened to be because wouldn't it be better if Henry sounded like James Bond, 007? Then I could understand Mimi Van Doren saying his batteries are not worn down. James Bond, of course, was a ladies' man. You can say it any way you want, but that's what is said